Right, I'm joined now to help me in this quest by Sir Richard Barrons, co-author of the Strategic Defence Review. And let's begin by the Strategic Defence Review. I mean, the Labour government adopted the lot of it without complaint. And thankfully now it seems that Starmer has agreed to spend the 3.5% on defence after bowing to pressure from NATO.
So, from the perspective of the review, we were asked to look at what does UK defence need to be in the 21st century. And with a lot of help, including from the Ministry of Defence, we've set out what is the most transformative change for about 150 years. And we judged that against a financial profile of 2.5% of GDP from 27 to 28 and 3% by 2034. What we were always clear about is as if there was more money or events meant we had to go faster, go faster.
I mean, when allocating how resources should be spent and how much is needed, how complicated is it in the modern age when there are so many different strands of warfare? There's economic warfare, there's all the grey zone warfare with cyber attacks, forced mass immigration. How is it that when you look at these things and think these are all the things that threaten a nation's integrity and security, quite what the government needs to be spending and in which departments?
So you make a really excellent point, which is the defence of the UK covers all of these things. So going to have to spend money on cyber defence, on managing the manipulation in social media, and you're going to have to spend money on surveilling the pipelines that keep the energy flowing into the country and on our access to space and dealing with missiles and all of those things. So it is a very difficult judgment. And then just within the Ministry of Defence, the Ministry of Defence spreadsheet of the things it spends money on is probably about 100,000 items, something like that. So they're really difficult judgments just within defence.
Let's talk about sort of all the different various forms of warfare and the threat from Russia, because a rather fast, I mean, not sort of atypical of the sort of nonsense that comes out of the Kremlin, but rather interesting interview with Russia's ambassador to the UK, who has blamed Britain for Ukraine's very successful attack on remote Russian airfields that saw 40 planes destroyed. He's turned around saying, we risk instigating World War III. I mean, do you think Britain had anything to do with this?
So I'm just a man in the street, so how would I know? But from everything we saw in those videos, there was nothing that Ukraine couldn't do on its own. So it was very clever. The technology they used is entirely within the gift of Ukraine, and they obviously know where to go in Russia. I'm not actually sure that's the thing we should be focused on, because it's really interesting that Russia has singled the UK out. So why would you do that? Well, one reason would be because it's too big a thing to lay at the door of the United States, because that's a really big challenge. But what we want to be clear about is when Russia says this sort of thing, is it because they're about to do something else to the UK, probably in cyberspace or against our critical national infrastructure? Because Russia does see itself at war with the UK and the West. And we shouldn't take that lightly.
Let's talk about critical national infrastructure, because a lot of people out there might not realise this, but much of the UK's critical national infrastructure is at present unguarded. We know that the GRU tend to sort of use activists on the ground in other countries to take out arson attacks on various installations, be they sort of weapons producing installations. But is that our greatest risk now? We know that we've got the shadow fleet stalking the seas where Russia is illegally selling its fossil fuels in the middle of oceans. But also they're sort of dragging anchors along, trying to get at those underwater cables. Do you think Russia's actually going to attack some of our critical national infrastructure, and how might that transpire?
So we want to be absolutely clear on a couple of things. The first is our daily life depends on those cables that connect the UK to the internet. And it's not just the City of London, it's all the emails and other things, our WhatsApps. If they transit to and from America, they go over those cables. Our energy mostly comes through gas pipelines from Norway, and electricity connects us to Europe. And every single one of us that has a smartphone relies on access to space. That's the GPS thing that tells you where you are. So we rely on these things for our daily life. And we don't really protect them because for more than 30 years we didn't need to. And now, not least because countries like Russia absolutely understand those vulnerabilities, and they know that if you want to break the will of the UK to resist on any particular point, that's probably where you start. So now we need to do a much better job of defending our critical national infrastructure. And the review talks about the things that defence should do, but the Prime Minister's also talked about a whole of society undertaking, and that's the next conversation. What is it that citizens need to do? What is it that the owners of these pipelines and cables need to do? Because this is probably the most critical vulnerability, certainly the most urgent.
I mean, I'm going to take you down a slightly different path, because it's always a popular topic of conversation, or unpopular, some might say, on this particular station, which is the threat posed at people who are not sort of identifiable entering the country illegally, and how much of a security risk this is. We know that today there's a court case taking place of 3 Iranian nationals who had plotted to bomb the Israeli embassy, and it turned out that some of them had come across on a dinghy across the channel. We've also seen coachloads of migrants being bussed into the Polish borders, rattling the fences with Belarus, potentially a master plan of the Kremlin. Similarly, I've heard from many people that Wagner mercenaries operate very happily in Africa, collecting a lot of money from enabling the mass exodus of people from war-torn regions there. How much is illegal immigration something that we need to consider when we talk about security, integrity and the defence of our realm?
So I think we can be clear about a couple of things. The first is countries like Russia understand that provoking strategic migration destabilizes Western countries, because they will send refugees, and it's very well documented, over the border to put great pressure on the cohesion within and between European states. So we're clear about that. Actually, the UK is shielded a bit because we are an island. The second thing we want to be really clear about is, yes, those migration channels, the illegal routes in, are sometimes used to bring in people who are meant to do us harm. These are agents of one sort or another. But actually, we should also recognise that in the UK and other parts of Europe, Russian intelligence services are hiring organised crime to do their work for them, because they're under too close surveillance to do it themselves. But then we also want to distinguish from about what the military can do, what the military shouldn't do, because the migrants that are coming across the channel illegally in small boats are universally not armed. This is a civil problem that should not, in my view, in any way be militarised.
Right, so when it comes to, if there's a change of government and the new Prime Minister said we want the Royal Navy to defend our waters and turn those boats around or block them from coming in, you would say, because you're in a position to sort of have an opinion on this as former commander of Joint Forces Command, that is absolutely unconscionable. The armed forces couldn't be used to do such a thing.
So I think it's a practical question, because I don't think any government of any persuasion in this country is going to send the Royal Navy to sink boats of unarmed men, women and children coming across the channel. That would be a gross violation of our values, quite apart from the fact it would be illegal. So what is it that institutions like the Royal Navy should do when confronted with migrant boats? Because they can turn them around, but they'll just turn around again. So the problem to that illegal migration is a policing and a security and a social issue. It's not a military issue. It's not something the military would do well.
General Sir Richard Barrons, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme.